let's try this again. How's everybody doing? Okay. That's how we're supposed to respond when we're talking about our children and education, right? Absolutely. Okay, all right. That includes all of our children, cradle to career, not just the babies, right? So we're all lifetime learners. So when we talk about education, it should be like, yes, we're great, right? How's everybody doing? Great! Woo! Okay, right. All right, so let's get started. This evening you're here with the Real News Network for the Future of Education Forum, where we'll be focusing on the current commission with our candidates for governor and lieutenant governor. Let's give them a round of applause. Just want to do some housekeeping for you. So first and foremost, if you are tweeting, please use the hashtag RealNewsEDU, hashtag RealNewsEDU. If you want to @ the Real News Network, you can @ the Real News. If you want to @ me, you can @ Ed2Be-Free. What we want to see on the hashtag for those of you in the room and those of you who are watching are your comments, your feedback, things that resonated with you, things that don't resonate with you. Our reach is wide, and we want to make sure that regular Baltimore citizens and people across the state of Maryland have a chance to weigh in on this discussion, so please use that. And towards the end, we'll try to take some questions that came up either from Facebook Live or social media. Is that cool? Mm-hmm. Okay. The format for this event will be that the first question will be asked to all of our candidates. Following that, we have representatives who are educators, students, parents, and advocates in the audience who pre-prepared some questions, and those of you in the audience, when you registered, will also ask questions that are burning for you around education, and we want to make sure some of those get lifted for our candidates. But as we move past the first question, what we're going to have happen is only the person asked the question will have a minute to respond. The person asking the question can do some clarifying and give a little bit of rebuttal. Not really rebuttal, we'll make sure that their question is answered. And then I'll open up the floor for other candidates to be able to weigh in on the topic. Finally, the first person who was asked the question will be able to tie up their thoughts having heard what was said, okay? All right, so I asked you guys if you knew what the current commission was. Probably 3 of you nodded your head. The rest of you were kind of like, people have said they're gonna fully fund it, don't know what that means. So why don't we take a moment to watch a video about the current commission, and then we'll come back in and jump right into questions. Let's begin.
You may have never heard of it, but the Commission on Innovation and Excellence in Education, also known as the Curran Commission, is arguably the most influential body in Maryland regarding the future of public education. Named after its chair and Chancellor Emeritus of the University System of Maryland, William Britt Curran, the 24-member board is tasked with creating a funding formula and policy recommendations that could impact public education for generations. The board itself is comprised of educators, politicians, and representatives of educational organizations, all selected by a variety of stakeholders, including the governor, the Maryland State School Board, and legislators. The commission's findings, along with recommendations, was scheduled to be released in 2017. However, the board has yet to release its final report, instead offering a preliminary summary in January 2018. From the preliminary report, we know a big part of the Commission's work is looking at how schools are funded. Article 8 of the Maryland Constitution requires the establishment throughout the state a thorough and efficient system of free public schools, and to provide by taxation or otherwise for their maintenance. The current commission is building on the work of the 2001 Thornton Commission. Thornton was created after Maryland entered into a consent decree because courts found the state had failed its constitutional mandate to adequately fund Baltimore City public schools. The consent decree was a partnership between the city and state to work together to improve Baltimore City schools through new funding and leadership. Under the Thornton recommendations, school funding began gradually increasing statewide in 2002, but tapered off after the Great Recession of 2007. A state report found this caused Baltimore to lose out on over $250 million in 1 year alone. Critics say Baltimore schools have been underfunded by $3 billion since 1996. Consultants found Maryland needs to spend $2.9 billion a year more to adequately educate its students. The commission hasn't come up with a price tag yet for the policies they will propose, but that's one of the things it's still meeting to figure out. There are currently 5 working groups hammering out the details for Kerwin's major policy recommendations. Expand access to universal pre-K to all 4-year-olds, low-income 3-year-olds, and all special education students. More resources for at-risk students. Commissioners found that as a state, Maryland spends 4.9% less money on poor districts than wealthy ones, the 15th most regressive funding system in the nation. Have a more rigorous teacher training and certification process. The recommendations also acknowledge the need for a more diverse teaching workforce. Just 25% of teachers are people of color compared to nearly 2/3 of the student body. Curriculum should be able to support all students to be college and career ready by 10th grade and provide resources to those who fall behind. And finally, the state needs to increase accountability for high-quality schools and strengthen governance, including in the implementation of the Commission's proposals. In 2019, the Maryland legislature will make decisions about the Commission's recommendations, determining whether they will be implemented and how they will be funded.
All right, so let me introduce our candidates on the stage. We first have Alec Ross. Alec is a startup advisor, former Obama administration alum, Baltimore City Schools dad, former teacher in Baltimore City Schools. Let's give it up for Alec Ross. We have Ben Jealous, who was the youngest ever president of the NAACP, president and CEO. In 2013, he was named Marylander of the Year by the Baltimore Sun for helping to lead the successful efforts to abolish the death penalty, pass marriage equality, pass the DREAM Act, and expand voting rights. Let's give it up for Ben. Next to Ben, we have Brandon Scott. Brandon is a running mate of Jim Shea. He is a Baltimore City Council member and chair of the Public Safety Committee. He served as a community organizer with Big Brothers and Big Sisters, and as a representative on the boards of the College Bound Foundation, the Center for Urban Families, and the Baltimore Community Mediation Center. Let's give it up for Brandon. We also have Elizabeth Embry, who's a running mate of Sharon Baker. She's a former chief of the Attorney General's Criminal Division and former Baltimore mayoral candidate. Let's give it up for Elizabeth. And we have Mr. Ralph Jaffe, who is a long-term teacher and activist. Let's give it up for Mr. Jaffe. And finally, we have Senator Rich Madaleno. He's the first elected to the Maryland General Assembly in 2002. Rich Madaleno has, well, let me dial back. He was the first openly gay person elected to the Maryland House and Senate, and has been at the forefront of every LGBT policy victory in Maryland. He has also passed vital economic, education, environmental, and transportation legislation, and he's recognized as a go-to budget expert in the legislature. Let's give it up for Senator Madaleno. So it's possible that I didn't say this, but I'm Dr. Kalila Harris, your host and moderator. I am new to the Real News Network as an executive producer and host, and so I'm glad to be here with you and to help spearhead some deeper reporting related to our Baltimore Bureau and education with the team members here at the Real News. I want to reiterate the ground rules for discussion. We are going to have the first question be answered by all of our candidates. We will also be allowing for interjection from respondents to future questions with a 30-second response. They have a timer in front of them. I will gently moderate when people go over time, gently meaning not so gently, so I want to forewarn you. And let's get right into it and ask some questions. Just a reminder, if everybody has access to Twitter, if you will use #RealNewsEDU, share your comments, feedback, and questions, and we may get to them towards the end. So my first question is going to go to one of the people who are most critical to us, my friend Kanaya here. Stand up for me, Kanaya. Kanaya is a 7th grader at Patterson Park Public Charter School. And let's start with Kanaya.
Hi, I go to school with a lot of kids who need extra support in school to do well, like more academic help at the school programs, support meals, mental health support, and dealing with trauma. Do you commit to providing more resources for students who are considered at risk and require services like these? And will you control to work with school districts like Baltimore that's currently paying for these services through general dollars?
Did you get her question?
The end we didn't hear.
Can you repeat the tail end of it? Right, the question.
And will you commit to working with school districts like Baltimore that's currently paying for these services through general dollars?
So we'll start with Mr. Ross.
Yes, so first of all, thank you all for coming out this evening. Thank you very much for that question. I mean, look, the short answer is yes, and it's why I'm running for governor. You know, my own background in education is I was a sixth grade public school teacher at Booker T. Washington Middle School. Fell in love with and married the math teacher across the hall who's now in her third decade teaching in Baltimore City Public Schools, and I have 3 children in Baltimore City Public Schools. And the situation that you're describing is entirely too widespread, and I don't know how it can be fixed without substantial resources, without substantial investment. So that's why I'm running for governor, is to solve this, is to address this problem. It's what brought me to Baltimore 24 years ago. It's why I moved here 24 years ago. And the reason I decided to run for governor is because 24 years later, not much had changed.
First of all, thank you. Thank you to everybody, but thank you for asking that question and speaking up for your fellow classmates. My mom was 12 years old when she sued Western High School for girls so she could desegregate it when she was 15 in 1955. And we've known, at least since then, and until we fully fund our schools, every other theory of education is just that. And you speak really to the trauma that so many young people are dealing with. I was back in the McCullough Homes housing projects where my mom grew up, talking to a boy about the age she was when she left, about 8. So what do you want your next governor to know? He said, I've seen too many dead men. One of the things that makes me different than the other candidates up here is that I have a plan to move us to state-based Medicare for all. Healthcare for all means mental health care for all. We have too many young people who are growing up traumatized without access to the health care that they need. So I'm absolutely committed to making sure that we get more resources for our schools, but also making sure that all the young people who are dealing with trauma actually have health care have access to the mental health care that they need.
Thank you again. I think that we will all agree that first and foremost, we have to fully fund our schools, but what the important thing about the Curran Commission and what they recognize is that goes just beyond the classroom. We know, we believe in the idea of the whole child, the entire family. That's why Jim Shea and I would push to have more community schools. As a council member, myself and all the members of the Public Safety Committee were the first to call for every school in Baltimore to become a community school, because we know the opportunities that places like Patterson Park Charter School offer to families. We know that we have so many children dealing with trauma and that our teachers can't deal with that and educate them at the same time. We have to invest in everything in our children. Education does not just mean the academics. It means how can that school be a resource for the entire family, especially in areas of high concentrated poverty, because we know the children are coming into school with so many other barriers that their other counterparts in wealthy areas are not.
Thank you very much for the question. And as a graduate of the public school system in Baltimore, I know exactly what you're talking about, and students coming from all different parts of the city with all the problems that they've faced in their homes and their neighborhoods. And it makes it very difficult sometimes for teachers to reach them and for them to even be present in school and be able to learn. The community school model, which has been touched on, has been remarkably successful in Baltimore City, as well as Prince George's County and across the state, but especially in Baltimore City. And that's a model that says we need to put all the resources in the school to make sure that everything that is stopping a child from learning are being addressed by the city. And so in our education plan and in the work that Sharon Baker has done in Prince George's, we talk about the state committing to do that, and the state committing the resources and the partnerships and the data and the accountability and all the pieces that go towards making sure that every dollar of money that goes to healthcare, that goes to vacant housing demolition and reconstruction, everything is being looked at through the lens of community schools. And how do you support the school as the center of the community? Thank you.
My name is Ralph Jaffe. Thank you for your question. I thank all of you for being here. Please get to know me. I am a product of the Baltimore public school system. I'm probably the oldest person on this panel. I probably have more experience as a classroom teacher being in the public sector as well as in the private sector than anybody here. I spent 35 years being a teacher. I love what I do. And I think every student should be treated with love and care, which is not going on right now. And so what I'm suggesting to you is this, that we need to do more to get children that are having problems on track. I have what's called a tutor-mentor program that is designed to be a connector for the students from the moment that they meet the students and the tutor-mentor team until they graduate with a degree in high school or a degree in college. Get to know what Ralph Jaffe's programs are all about. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rich Madalino, and in fact, I am the one person up here who is a member of the Kerwin Commission. In my 16 years in the legislature, I've spent a lot of time working on education finance issues. I had the chance to be at the Patterson Park Public Charter School just about a week and a half ago. It's a beautiful school. It's a beautiful campus. I have to say that the number one area where I think the state has not fulfilled its role in supporting our public schools and our public school kids is in the support services. That when you heard in the introductory video, as the recession hit and funds were reduced over time or the growth diminished, what happened is the funding that went into the support staff, into the support services to help young people overcome barriers, that is the money that went. That's where we have to put our focus, and I think you will see in the final report of Kerwin, that is the central theme.
All right, I'm gonna turn back to Kanaya.
Excuse me, can I have a rebuttal for what's been said?
Not just yet. Okay, thank you. Kanaya, was your question answered?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Thank you.
So let's move on to another student. Again, the reason we're here, I'm going to talk to Brother Michael Unoko. I'm going to talk to Michael next. Come on, Michael. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your question.
My name is Michael Unoko. I go to St. Neighborhoods High School. Assuming the referendum about the casino money passes, there will be new money for education in the years 2019 and 2020 school years. As an upcoming junior with limited time left in the Baltimore City school system, I would like to know, how are you going to use those dollars to support students who are in high school and about to exit the Baltimore City school system?
Thank you. So that's for you, Mr. Jealous. Will you take that question first?
Yeah, thanks. You know, those funds, that promise, the casino money, lottery money, making sure that our gambling revenues are used in the way that we were each promised is core to my campaign. It's part of why I've been endorsed by 74,000 educators across the state, their union, the MSEA. And we need to make sure that we have a high quality teacher in every classroom. We need to make sure that we build out community schools. But we also need to make sure that all of our community colleges across the state become tuition free. So folks like yourself can really look forward to preparing for a career, moving into college. We've gone further and said that we believe that we can actually shrink our prison system by 30%, save $660 million, and pump those funds into actually making college and graduate school tuition free for students who say that they'll train for a profession that is in high demand and stay in the state for 10 years. So we need to do more for you than to just make high school better.
Good? Okay. Anybody else want to jump in on that question?
Dr. Brandon.
Brandon, please.
Yeah, I would just add that first and foremost, what we have to do with that money is what it was intended to do, and that's to fully fund your education system. We have to do that day one. Whoever wins in January of 2019, they have to do that. We have to put that money in it. We need to look at sports betting and put that money in it. We have to legalize marijuana and put that money towards education as well, because you deserve to have a world-class education that prepares you from pre-K all the way through college or training, that when you leave high school, you can go to work or go to college and compete on a worldwide scale. scale. We cannot make the same mistakes that our predecessors have made and allow money to be Jedi mind tricked from one account to the next. We have to make sure that it's there for education and spent on education to do all the things that we said. Free pre-K for everyone, free college, free community college, investing in universal training programs and college programs for you guys, making sure that you have the best teachers and the teachers do not have to leave the classroom in order to gain a raise, that they can grow as being a teacher and grow in teaching you each and every day. Those are the kind of things that we need to make sure is happening with that money so that we do not make the same mistakes in the past.
Thank you. The force was not with you. So I want to remind everybody that you take 30 seconds
Oh,
to
yeah,
respond
sorry.
when you're not the first
But
person.
it wasn't,
answering.
I'm looking at the thing, so they didn't reset
The
it
30
correctly.
went out. It
Thank
did.
you, young
No, it
man.
did.
30 seconds.
My bad.
Next time I'll go. With that.
My polite tapers off around 6:45.
I was taking it.
Oh, no.
Take
As
as many
punishment,
extra
next
seconds.
answer you have to do as Yoda.
There you go. Elizabeth?
We'll leave that to you, Rich. Let's go.
I want to just add a principle, which is that I do support using the casino money absolutely for education, but education shouldn't depend on special sources of funding. It is a constitutional right. It is our #1 prerogative, #1 commitment in the state of Maryland. So yes, we should spend casino money. Yes, we should spend sports gambling if that passes, but I don't think if any of that passes, funding education fully will be our top priority. And if that means cuts to other programs, cuts to other things, then so be it. That's been Rashawn Baker's policy and principle in every budget in Prince George's County. Fund education first, and everything else will be figured out, because that is what we have to do in Maryland. And I've run out of time, and I don't want to get yelled at by Kalila. All right?
She's met me before. Rich?
I'll try to answer your question. For someone who has 2 years left in high school, I think where we'll prioritize that funding for young people in high school is through after-school programs and summer enrichment programs to make sure that you get those added benefits for that remaining time that you have. And the theory that we're going with Kerwin is the first set of investments and resources will definitely be targeted to the highest need districts and then the highest need schools within those districts, so that you will have and your classmates will have a chance to benefit from that money in some sort of meaningful way.
Great. I'm going to move to the next question, and we'll get you to jump in.
Could I answer that question, please?
We'll go back to the next question, and then we'll get you in to make sure you can respond. Okay? Did you have a follow-up? Okay, great. So I want to move to Brother John Gray. Come on, stand up for me, John. John is with the Baltimore Algebra Project and a City College high school student. What year?
10th grade.
What year?
10th grade.
All right, come on, John.
So like she said, I'm a member of the Baltimore Algebra Project. So one of the babies of the Algebra Project is NSBR, the National Student Bill of Rights. And the National Student Bill of Rights is a construct of rights agreed on by like teachers, students, community members, of what we feel like students or young people are entitled to. And one of the rights is right 6, restorative justice. And part of that restorative justice right, or way we enact on that, is the police school police report card that's in this, like, I think 2nd or 3rd year of like running, which is a way for students and school members to kind of partake in like their active lives and like how their school police officers conduct, which is just one example of it. But I guess my question is, how do we, if any of you were to like whoever wins, how would you enact, or how would you how would you help stabilize and like make official NSBR, and how would you help, and then how would you go about enacting on those different rights, or like going through the rights of NSBR, I guess?
So if I can help drill that back down, tell me if I'm off. The question is both around your support for the possibility of passing the National Students Bill of Rights, and I think I heard you drill down into the particular right around restorative practices and relationship between school police and students, and whether or not school police should be in schools at all. Is that right?
Yeah.
You got it? Brandon?
Yeah, so first and foremost, the answer to the first portion of the question is yes. We believe in making sure that students have rights. As a former student government person at Murrayville High School, it was something that we thought about even back then, and we will commit to doing that at the state level, but also in the local jurisdictions. We think that there are great student organizations around the state that do great work, but we haven't done a great job of listening to them and considering their voices. At the end of the day, you are the customer when it comes to education in the state of Maryland, so your voice should ring heavier than it does today. Also, to go to Restorative Justice, as the Vice Chair of the Community Mediations Board, I believe that we need community restorative justice throughout our system and actually throughout our city and throughout our state. We are too punitive with our justice system. We are not repairing people. We are not showing people how to deal with the harm and trauma that everyone is causing. And to your last point with school police, we know that there's been a lot of reforms. We still need more. We have to bring you guys all to the table, but also, most importantly, make sure that there's accountability for the school police officer and that people can actually legislate and make sure that they're following policies and practices that are beneficial to students.
Alec?
Yeah, I want to just speak very briefly on this. Right now, it's very trendy in politics right now, including in Annapolis, with the school shootings that have taken place, to say we need more armed guards in schools. Hey, maybe we should even give teachers guns. Look, if you give me a choice between an armed guard or a resource officer or a counselor and say which one will make a school safer, the answer is the counselor. If we invest in counselors, psychologists, and social workers, we can have fewer police officers in the schools. And ultimately, I think these police officers, I think their very presence oftentimes can re-traumatize students.
Mr. Jaffe, and then Ben.
First of all, I was a great admirer of Martin Luther King. I heard his speech, I Have a Dream. Powerful. Also, please keep this in mind. I am not a politician or a wannabe career politician. And be careful when you hear their promises. Do they deliver? In my experience, they do not. I want to talk with you and speak the truth. I'm a straight shooter, a straight talker. That's what I believe in.
Ben?
You know, I think that we really have to embrace restorative justice as a form of teaching. Because what you're doing is you're saying this school is a circle. And if you violate the rules, the values of the circle, we're going to help you find your way back into the circle. And that makes our society stronger. At the same time, absolutely, the idea that students should have a Bill of Rights, that we should really be embracing your voices, but also your role as citizens is important. You can sign me up for both.
I just want to add something. I worked a lot in restorative justice and couldn't agree more. It's overwhelmingly proven to be more effective than the criminal justice system. But the thing I just want to add is I think it's really important for the governor to promote student government, because the Algebra Project, and I have to say, the city grad, I'm so proud of the Algebra Project, is an example of what students should be doing. So students need to have a voice, and something that the governor can do in partnership with local systems is make sure that students are able to create student governments and have the resources and support they need to do that.
So we're going to move on to the next question, and we're going to pivot to a parent. We have some runners in the audience who have a microphone, and we're going to go to Melissa Schober, who's a parent advocate.
Thank you. For all the candidates, in January of 2018, Maryland passed the Every Student Succeeds Act plan for implementation for the next iteration of NCLB. Our current governor called it weak on accountability. I know that there are some of you that disagree with that, but if you could change one or two things about the way in which we will be grading schools in future years, what would they be specifically? One or two things you could change.
Elizabeth, we'll start with you.
Well, let me say just more generally, and the question of accountability is really one of partnership. And so one of the things we've committed to is having a cabinet level position. So someone who is, their job is to work not just with MSDE, but also with all of the local school systems to hear and also to spread best practices, so that we are doing everything in our power, not to come in and point fingers, but to come in and be a partner to every local system and how they're collecting data, how they're doing accountability, how they're best measuring. So, you know, I think that is, the governor has to be a partner. I think that is the critical answer to accountability in this going forward and implementing Kerwin.
Did you have a follow-up, Melissa?
I was specifically looking for answers regarding the scoring system. So proposed as part of ESSA, for those of you who might not be as familiar, schools will be graded with 1 to 5 stars, which is something viewable to parents, and the way in which the ESSA plan is constructed gives some weight to academics and some weight to non-academics. So I was looking for specific answers around those pieces, if any of the candidates had a response.
Let me add, so one of the things that is, I'm sure you know, is that over the years, COMAR has been expanded and expanded to come up with more and more requirements and policy recommendations based on lots of best practices over many years, and arts education, but across all of the fields. And so, but they're not fully funded. And they're also, each one represents, again, smart people thinking for a long time about how to measure and how to accomplish advances in those areas. So I think looking at COMAR and reflecting in a way that's transparent and viewable to parents, progress in those areas I think would be a big step forward, and more available data and more rich data for parents.
Yes, Mr. Jaffe?
I am opposed to testing. Testing is a bunch of hogwash. You know how a person learns in life, what real education is all about? Learning how to get along with people, especially when you disagree with each other, how to communicate and be civil. That's what real education is all about. That's what I'm for.
Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in on that? Yes.
I do think there is a role for testing. Assessing the progress of students is important for informing education. The problem that we've had with testing is it's become a tool to bludgeon teachers with, and not actually to inform teaching to help move individual students forward. From an assessment standpoint, I think one of the things that I would add is for the state to assess whether or not the school system is keeping its promise in actually delivering the services that the state is trying to pay for. Are we putting in the support services into that school? Are we doing the other things that we've promised through the Kerwin Commission when it's recommended to make sure parents know whether or not their local jurisdiction and the state, I'd be happy to have the state be part of it, if whether or not those entities, the government, is keeping its promise to the children and to that school.
Before we take another response, I do want to remind those of you in the audience and those of you watching live to use the hashtag RealNewsEDU if you have comments, feedback, reactions, so that we can share them here with the audience and also possibly get to some of your questions towards the tail end of this event. Yes, Ben?
I guess one thing I would say as a parent of 2 kids in the public schools is that it seems like those scores too often just measure the relative sort of wealth and privilege of the parents in the neighborhood, and not what's actually happening at the school to actually lift students up and advance them forward. And I am concerned that we are generally over-testing our kids. We really need measures that, on the one hand, are not so onerous that they impede our students from learning, which often seems to be the case. And we also really need to measure the effectiveness at that school at moving students forward, and not just have these tests that seem to, like I said, mostly correlate with wealth and not with actual achievement inside the 4 walls.
So instead of taking your response, Mr. Jaffe, I'm going to move to the next question, which is a parent and Baltimore City educator, Ebony McIver. And she has a similar question around accountability, but you'll have the full minute.
Hi, good evening. So my question to everyone is that in addition to equitable funding, the Kerwin Commission has provided preliminary recommendations on how to improve school for Maryland students. As an educator, I have been led to believe that already these recommendations have been implemented across schools. So my question to you all is, how can we ensure that you all will implement these recommendations with fidelity? And if you don't, rather than waiting for re-election, how can we hold you all accountable?
You know what the problem is? We have politicians who don't keep their word. They talk a lot. When it comes to action, it's 0. That's one of our major problems. Now, what I believe in is a tutor mentor program. I mentioned that initially. Please check my website, fedupwithcrookedpolitics.com, and you will see the specificity of the tutor mentor program. It's designed to bring students with role model successful people to connect with each other. See, the problem is we don't have role models that connect with the students. We need to bring the role models to connect with the students from the time they connect until the time the student gets a job, either out of high school or out of college. That's what the Jaffe education plan is all about. And guess what? It doesn't cost any money, except for fingerprinting. I was told you have to fingerprint They tutor team people to make sure they're not bad people. But this program doesn't cost any money.
Thank you, Mr. Jaffe. Ms. McIver, is your question answered?
No.
Yes, please stand. Thank you.
So really what I'm trying to get to is that a lot of these recommendations are just good teaching practices or just good practices for schools, period. So for as long as I have been in education now, for a decade, these are things that are already supposed to have been implemented in school systems across Maryland. So I guess what I'm asking you is, one, how can we ensure that as governor you are going to implement these recommendations? And two, if we don't, how are we going to hold you accountable?
Brandon, yes.
Yeah, I would just first start by saying that the first and foremost what we would do day one is that we would have the policies put in place, right? It's not just about the policies for the funding, but also about the reforms. And with them being in law, then you can hold your elected accountable for what's in law and what the systems are doing across the state. But there's also an opportunity, I think, for us to have assessment throughout this process, because this is going to be world-changing for education in Maryland. And what the next governor should be doing is having annual updates and meetings with the state, across the state of Maryland, where we're talking about implementation of Kerwin, how it's going, how each system across the state of Maryland is faring. That's how you can hold us accountable before election time.
Ben?
I was trained as an organizer when I was 18 years old, and I was taught then that we don't elect politicians to make change happen. We don't give up that power. We elect politicians to make it easier for us to make change happen. In this campaign, I've been very clear. This is about making me governor as a means to make it possible for our unions, our movements, our civil rights organizations to actually make change happen. So I would say, please, don't count on any one of us to go make change happen by ourselves. Let's plan on staying in movement mode and pushing the politicians in the state capitol to have courage. And what I've done to make it easier to hold me accountable is I put all of my plans on the website and all of the pay-fors there, so you know precisely how we plan to go after it. But I'm going to need your help.
You got to talk about Yoda now.
Senator Madaleno, and then I'm going to come back around.
Thank you for that question. And as the parent of 2 children in a Maryland public school, I will see it through their lens, as well as making an effort to go out and be engaged with the school children and the school personnel around the state. I would be happy to give myself a report card and give myself a self-assessment every year to demonstrate that whether or not we are keeping the promise. Because you're right, that has been, these are all common sense recommendations. We have to make sure that you have the supports as a teacher, that the children of the schools have the supports they need in order to succeed. And the way we're going to do that is through putting the policies in place. And that's where I have the unique record of accomplishment.
Mr. Jaffe, if you have a closeout thought, then we're going to move to the next question. Yes.
Can you keep it secret, ladies and gentlemen? We don't have any ethical politicians in the state legislature. For that matter, even in terms of the governor, that's our problem. We don't have any ethical politician in either party. Until we do that, promises mean zero.
All right. So moving on to the next question.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. That's a real.
I think we need to keep you all sat next to each other.
I'm sure you're the ones that want to be politicians too. So.
And there you have it.
No, I'm a teacher, please. I'm a teacher, not a politician.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We're going to hear next from Maritza Solano, who's from Casa de Maryland, and she's here. We're going to stay on that theme of accountability, but shift a little bit.
Yes, so thank you all for being here. Immigrant parents and students are living in fear and participating less in key areas that impact school funding and school budgeting, like not filling out lunch forms or accessing social services, which help measure poverty. What alternatives do you see to ensure all kids are counted?
Senator?
Thank you for that question, and I see it in my children's own school, where you're having to fill out paperwork for an emergency. Who has emergency care for a child should the parents just not show up one day because they've been taken away by the federal government. I mean, it's appalling what is happening in our communities. And you need a governor who's going to stand up and stand up for our immigrant communities. Specifically on your issue, I think by pursuing policies like I'm proud of a law that is in place today that made sure that every child in the Baltimore City school system had a free breakfast and lunch, because that's the policy of the state. And so that we don't have to worry about paperwork. We have to figure out how we get to some of these counts without doing the paperwork so that you don't get caught up in whether or not the services and the funding is following people who are filing the paperwork. So if you do a farm, if you need to apply for a farm system, a farm benefit, you have to make sure the child remembers to bring the form in, give it to the parent, send it back. There are a lot of reasons why these sorts of programs that are based upon specific counts have flaws that we should seek to change moving forward.
Maritza, I see your face.
So yes, and also in addition, also helping parents quell their fears, sort of participating in general in schools as well, given the climate.
Well, I think we should. I mean, I've been proud to be the one person out here whose name is on the Trust Act. Over and over, you need a governor who's going to stand up for the immigrant community to make sure that they don't feel fear dealing with any public agency, because we will have a policy that says we're not going to participate with immigration enforcement no matter which agency, state, local, school, non-school, social services.
So we're going to go Liz, and then Alec, and then Brandon.
I just want to add, I couldn't agree more with Rich. I mean, we should be evaluating every form that has to be filled out to see if it's actually necessary for the students to receive the services, and if we can do it in a way that is not identifying students as in poverty or not in poverty. But also, the community school model, which is touched on, is a great model when schools can partner with organizations like CASA to best understand exactly what parents are facing and the obstacles, because the obstacles, I imagine, may not be the actual obstacles to parents interacting with their schools and with the school system largely. And then finally, it's not just looking at doing an audit of state agencies, but it's also working with hospitals and the court system to say, how can we do better to make sure, A, that we're eliminating obstacles to participation, but also sending a message affirmatively that you're safe in those spaces.
Alec?
One of the most important things that I think a governor can do is model sort of the anti-Trump values on issues of immigration. I mean, it ought to be the case that when you drive from Donald Trump's Washington into Maryland on this issue of immigration and immigrants' rights, you're entering the resistance. And if people know that not only is there hostility coming from the state and that they've got our immigrants' backs, but that there are going to be resources where we're working with the Attorney General's office, where you're working with the governor's office, between civil society organizations and between state government, and raise the level of confidence and know that there's not going to be cooperation or collaboration with immigrations and customs enforcement. I think that that's what a governor can do to really help lead on this issue.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yes, I think the first and most important thing, I agree with everything that everyone has said, is that we need a governor that's not going to cower in fear to Trump. And that's exactly what Governor Hogan has done. He's been silent on all the madness that Trump has talked about in destroying communities and families in Maryland. But also, I think that when we talk about the forms, we also, something that working with CASA to pass the municipal ID bill here in Baltimore, we worked on, actually, after we get that information, if we don't need it, destroy it. So if they come to ask for it, it's not there for them to take from us. But we have to be partners. We also, as governor, has to be a leader in showing the rest of the state that this will not be tolerated and that we will treat everyone in our state with dignity and fairness.
So I want to pivot a little bit, but we're going to take this last point from Ben, and then we're going to move to the next question and start the round again with Alec responding first, okay?
All right.
Ben?
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I'm proud to have co-chaired the campaign to pass the DREAM Act in Maryland. I'm proud to be the only one up here who's already been locked up outside of Trump's White House. I was there to defend our dreamers. And I'm proud to have been endorsed by CASA. And when I'm governor, we will pass the SAFE Act, also known as the Trust Act, to make sure that our law enforcement does not become distracted, pretending like they're ICE. We have 2-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 6-year-olds who wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go see if their parents are still in bed. Our kids are living in terror. We have to absolutely change how we hold on to records so that they can't be used in ways that they weren't intended to. But we also just have to make it easier for parents who don't speak English to have fluid communications with teachers. And so we got to deal with it both to protect the parents and the families, but in the meantime also make it easier for them to be stewards of their children's education.
Okay, we're going to come down to a representative from the Maryland State Education Association, Allison Hyde. She's also an elementary school teacher. Stand up for us, Allison. I want to get back into a couple of comments that we heard up here around testing. Go ahead, Allison.
So the state is currently transitioning out of PARC and is searching for a new vendor to design the annual statewide assessment in math and English language arts. As governor, what would be your plan to move away from the disruptive standardized testing we have seen in recent years while staying compliant with the federal requirements for annual testing?
It's simple, to do the minimum required. You know, my kids, it seems like they are in a constant process of testing. They take PARC, and then they take iReady, and then they take this one, and then they take that one. My son is in high school, so he's now taking these college prep tests. So we have to be federally compliant. So the only way I know we can be federally compliant without heaping more testing on our students is to figure out what the minimum standard is and then achieve the minimum standard, but then not require anything above that.
Yes, Mr. Jaffe.
You know, one of our problems is politicians or wannabe politicians just love to talk. But guess what? I know how to listen. You have ideas. I want to hear what your ideas. You asked a very good question. How would you answer the question? I want to learn from you. I'm not ashamed to admit that I can learn from my students.
So I don't want to put you on the spot to answer the question because you're not running for governor. And we're going to come back to the panel and have them answer your question, which is why we're all here.
But I still want to hear her answer.
You can talk to her afterwards.
I'll do that.
Senator
Great.
Madaleno.
You got a deal. You have a deal.
So just this past year, working with my colleague in the House, Delegate Eric Ebersol, we passed legislation that would add 2 teachers and 1 PTA representative to the state school board, a bill that has been vetoed by the governor, with the whole idea of having classroom teachers and parents sitting at the table when these decisions are made so that you can work through the issues of, if you have a certificated, if you make a requirement that a certificated employee has to be there to proctor, you're going to disrupt gym and art and music for 6 weeks. If you're going to schedule blocks of time, 2 hours, when no school functions on a 2-hour time frame, and you disrupt the class day. Those sorts of common sense things where you have the right people around the table to help inform the right decision. As governor, I don't think I'm the one that should be coming up with the miracle about how we do testing, but you should be, and your colleagues should be, and other parents should be in making those decisions.
Thank you. Anyone else? Elizabeth?
I just want to add, and I couldn't agree more with the inclusion of the people who are actually doing the teaching and doing the work. But the thing I want to add is technology has been advancing really quickly, and the ability to use, portfolio evaluations and evaluations of students in their performance across all kinds of disciplines that doesn't disrupt the work that they're doing, I think is really exciting and something we should, as a state, should be looking at. You know, how can we integrate testing, but not testing, evaluation, into the work of teachers so that it's representing the qualitative work of students and teachers and not, sort of closer to a standardized model that is really not, again, not qualitative in the way that I think our students deserve.
I'll take Ben and then Brandon.
Yeah. As a parent of 2 kids in our public schools, I'm frustrated that this governor has made our summer slide longer, and it seems like more and more of the time that they're in school gets eaten up by testing. One opportunity that this governor's missed is that there's still 7 slots with the federal government for states that want to innovate in this area, that want to find ways to actually track our students' progress without such intensive testing. And we need to be one of those states. And when I'm governor, I'll make sure that we are one of those states. Larry Hogan simply has presided over our kids having less time to learn. And we have to be very aggressive about making sure that they have more time to learn.
Brandon, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to simply add that we know the history of these standardized tests, and we also have to recognize as we're implementing this and we're implementing Kerwin and trying to be fair and equitable for all, we also have to realize that these tests have not been fair and equitable in history. We know that we have to consider race and culture and other things and where kids living in poverty, English language learners, all of these kind of things we have to do as we're coming up with those innovative tests and ways to monitor our students' progress that Ben talked about. And the only way we can do that is we're inclusive and bring everyone in to formulate that across the state.
So, Brandon, you just talked about race equity.
And I want to pivot to Wesley Hawkins, who's a graduate of Baltimore City Schools. He's also a member of Baltimoreans for Educational Equity and a founder of the Nolita Project.
How you doing to all candidates? So my question is, so how do you deal with the trend of high poverty schools continue to hire least qualified educators and principals dealing with high levels of turnover?
Ben, it's for you.
You know, my parents met as teachers at the old Harlem Park Junior High, and my mom noticed when she was there that, you know, when they came to desegregate the schools, they were very selective about the black students that they chose to desegregate white schools. But my mom, my dad, who was a white teacher, realized that they hadn't been as selective about the teachers that they brought in to desegregate the black schools. And there's been a long trend of us, quite frankly, not making sure that every school has a high quality teacher. And that's part of my passion, to make sure that our schools are finally fully funded, because we have to be able to recruit and retain the best teachers. And quite frankly, we need to make sure that the shortage of teachers of color and of male teachers of color is addressed head on, because we know how transformative that can be for young people. We've known for a long time that until we fully fund our schools, every other theory of education is just a theory, including integration itself. And it's time for us to fully fund our schools and to have high standards for our students, but also with the teachers that we're recruiting, how we train them, how we retain them, how we lift them to the next level in their profession.
Thank you. Senator Madaleno?
Thank you for that question. It's interesting. People may be surprised to learn that my children are both African American. And last year, in an interesting experience for me, my daughter had her first African American teacher in the Montgomery County school system for math, and her math grades soared. Now, she was a great teacher, but it's not lost on me. She was a great teacher who was also a person of color, and my daughter bonded with her. We must bring more teachers of color into the school system. We're going to do that by investing in the schools of education at our HBCUs as part of solving the issue around the consent decree and the argument about the disparity with the funding for the HBCUs, as well as part of the Kerwin Commission, and make sure we bring in high quality teachers of color. We can marry these two and get them done, and that will be fundamental to my administration and certainly to the implementation of the Kerwin Commission.
So I'm so glad I went to Morgan State University, so thank you for injecting that in. Alec?
Yeah, you asked a very specific question, so I want to give a very specific answer. One of what I thought were one of the best recommendations in the Kerwin Commission is that we create career ladders for teachers. So rather than, just saying you're a teacher of first year, second year, third year, but one of the ways of keeping outstanding educators in the classroom is you can certify at higher levels. You can become master teachers and other such things. If you create a career ladder for educators to help keep them in the classroom, and then create incentives, including financial incentives, for master teachers and more accredited teachers to teach in schools with higher concentrations of poverty, just put a thumb on this scale to try to drive the most experienced, most accomplished teachers into the schools that most need them.
So I'm going to take a point of personal privilege and not allow this commentary around HBCUs to go not spoken to. Because although I am proud of Morgan State University, I'm proud of Coppin State University and Bowie State University and University of Maryland Eastern Shore. And we know there is a lawsuit pending where the state is seeking to settle the score for the ways those schools have been underfunded and undersupported. So I'm going to offer 30 seconds to a few of you if you want to speak to that further. Ben?
When I was 23 years old, I was in Jackson, Mississippi, organizing students because the governor was fixing to turn a public historically black college into a prison. And I was there as part of a family. My grandma's granddad was born a slave. He co-founded Virginia State. My family's attended Morgan and worked there for generations. I'm a trustee of Morehouse now. And it's great to hear everybody saying that we need to stop the lawsuit and get creative about what we should do with the funds that the schools deserve. But it's kind of too late at that point to be talking about innovation. You've got to first deal with the basic equity issues, make sure that the schools are restored for all the funding that they were denied for years, and then put your ideas for innovation on top of that. on top of that, because when the foundation of the school has been eroded by chronic underfunding for decades, we have to restore that just on general principle, and then bring our best ideas for how we build Morgan and Coppin and Bowie and UMES on top of that.
Thank you. Brandon?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We have to do that. We know that the lawsuit is laughable. We know that Governor Hogan offering $100 million to erase decades of underfunding is actually a joke, and we should laugh at him for doing that. But also, we know that we have to make those investments. We need to repeal the lawsuit, but we have to make the innovations in those programs, making sure that Coppin, Morgan, UMES, Bowie have programs that no other state university has, so that we can build them up and build those people. When I was fresh out of college, I worked at Coppin State, helping them to build a Coppin Man program, and seeing the potential of those students, but they still are not afforded the same opportunities, and we have to make sure that that happens.
Mr. Jaffe?
First of all, teachers are my heroes. We have to pay them a better salary. They must get more money. That's the bottom line. I also want to comment about blaming Mr. Hogan. You know, last time I checked, the state legislature is made up mostly of Democrats. Most of the governors have been Democrats. I'm no big fan of Mr. Hogan. In fact, I think I was the first one who called for his impeachment. But to be fair about this, both parties are at fault here.
Thank you, Mr. Jaffe. Liz, HBCUs?
I just want to make 2 points. One is there's been a tendency to provide capital dollars to the HBCUs instead of operating dollars. And it's sort of a way of like buying an additional year, buying a few more years. But we have to commit to capital dollars. I mean, it's been talked about how woefully low the number has been by Governor Hogan. And that's low for decades and decades of underfunding. The other thing, though, is colleges, and I will call out Morgan State again just because I live nearby and I know very well the work they're doing. They're serving students. They're going out of their way to serve students from really challenging backgrounds, students who need extra support. And so we should be pouring more money into programs at HBCUs generally, and also some of the specific programs at Morgan because of the special work they are doing, including remediation for some kids who come from really tough high school experiences. They're performing a special role in the state, and we need to recognize that.
Thank you. Rich?
If you want to end the lawsuit, elect a different governor. Because it's the governor who has directed the Attorney General to do the appeal. And we can have a governor who pulls back on the appeal and actually puts the resources in order to undo, at least starting to undo, the decades of underfunding and the disparate treatment of the HBCUs. It's going to take time and effort, but it's something that has to be done. And I was just trying to bring up that I think that the best way to start to be innovative is start that innovation in the schools of education that propel them forward to help propel a more diverse teaching workforce for all the young people of our state.
Thank you. And Morgan State has one of the premier education programs in our state. It is also the premier public research institution in our state. And I want to pivot to Alex Warwick Adams, who is the executive director of Elevate Baltimore. Did I lose Alex? Here she is. She's right in front of me. And she had a question about maintaining premier status for Maryland. As we know, we've slipped in ranking for the past few years between public, urban, and rural districts.
Good evening, everyone. As many of you are familiar with the work of the Commission has been doing to ensure that whole student issues and student needs are addressed in the funding formula, can you talk about, as governor or your administration, how you see community schools, out-of-school time programs playing a key role in ensuring student success, and how would you in your administration work to ensure that Maryland moves to be a leader in this work, both in rural jurisdictions and in urban jurisdictions?
Brandon? Yep.
Yeah, so as I laid in earlier, I think that community schools are critically important. When we think about children, when I think about Brandon Scott as a 5th grader at Dr. King Elementary in Park Heights, I know that the after-school programs that I went to directly had an impact on me going forward, to being able to go to Roland Park for middle school. That led me going to Mervo, then off to St. Mary. So we have to make those investments. As Jim Shea and Brandon Scott, we will do that. We know that it's not just about funding in those hours from school from 7 to 3, but it's also about making sure that every child across the state has access to quality after school, but not just them. That families as well. We know what schools can be. They can be the hub, as was said earlier, to the community. And that doesn't matter if you're here in the city or you're out in rural areas. As someone who used to run programs, after-school programs, and mentoring programs throughout the state of Maryland, from St. Mary's County to Harford County. We know that families across the state, especially those who are living in poverty, and there are concentrated areas of poverty in every jurisdiction in the state, need those same resources, but we only highlight those who live in urban and the suburban areas. We have to make that possible for every student and every family across the state, so we will make that investment.
Alec.
Yeah, let me just add my perspective that I do think community schools are game-changing, and I think they can be as helpful in rural communities as in urban areas. I do want to acknowledge the good work that's been done in Baltimore by the City Council here and the leadership of people, including Brandon, including Councilman Zeke Cohen and others, who have made sure that we are investing in our community schools. But we have flatlined a little bit. We got to a certain level of community schools investment in Baltimore, but we are not increasing the numbers here. I think that one of the most important byproducts of a changed formula is we have to view this as a model for how we invest in schools broadly. It can't just be whole student. If we look at whole community, then we're going to get a lot more out of the student. And people talk about the cost. I say you pay now or you pay later. Nobody's going to regret those expenses that we make today, because it's going to save us a lot more money, and we're going to have a healthier community and healthier families.
And we can see some of your tweets coming in live here. I see a lot of thumbs moving feverishly in the room, so keep up those comments and remarks at #RealNewsEDU. And you can @The Real News, or you can @EdToBeFree if you like what I'm saying or you think the dark side has taken over. All right, Liz, thank you.
I just want to point out there's a terrific op-ed in The Sun. It was written by Dr. Thornton and by David Hornbeck, who are two great leaders in education in the state of Maryland. And they make the point that the question is not what to do. It's a question of political leadership and public will. That the fact that we have between 2013 and 2015 lost ground in our performance in reading and math, I think it's at the 4th grade and the 8th grade level, unlike most states in the country. It's not that other states are doing so much better, we're actually doing worse. And it's tied to funding, but it's also tied to not following the original Thornton recommendations in terms of addressing equity issues. Kerwin is great. Kerwin talks about this problem. Like, we have to invest as a state in the support services that support what's in the classroom. We've all talked at length about how terrific community schools are. I just want to add that there's lots of money being spent to help families. We have to coordinate it, though, with the schools, and that's something that a governor really is in a good position to do in partnership with local jurisdictions.
Mr. Jaffe, yes.
Please forgive me, but until we get politicians that we can trust, who will tell the truth and keep their word and be committed not to their personal money, fame, and power, but to being good public servants, we're not going to get a handle on any of these problems. That's the real truth.
Ben, yes.
Coming back to community schools, I would say that I would associate myself with every comment that's been made up here. They're critical. We need to make sure that we have a community schools coordinator in all of our schools that are serving low-income communities to start, and eventually all of our schools. A governor has a role when it comes to public-private partnerships to try to increase the resources that are headed towards those schools. We also need to see their value for parents. One of the things I'm very concerned about is we have too many parents who cannot read in our state. We're kind of ashamed to talk about it, but we have to understand that if those parents, we have to get them reading at a higher level so that they can help their students.
Thank you. I want to shift a little bit to some brass tacks. Some have said that it's a little bit difficult to distinguish between the candidates because you are all amazing people with great policy recommendations. So I want to turn to... Not all of you?
Not all look alike.
They look alike. Well, you don't look alike.
Yeah, to be clear,
It's a funny group to blend in together.
Yes. I want to turn to Morgan Showalter, who is a Baltimore City teacher and the Baltimore Teachers Union representative in the current commission, to ask a question specifically about your work with the legislature.
Thank you. Yes, so my question is about consensus building. It might have two parts depending on how you answer this. On which policy positions do you believe the Kerwin Commission will have the most difficulty forming a consensus?
Liz?
Okay, I think, well, when you talk about resources, the question is, right, how are resources distributed? I think that will be one of the critical questions that we will be fighting. This governor has clearly made a decision politically to spend money where he believes his votes have come from, and has withheld education funding, transportation funding from those jurisdictions that he believes are not his jurisdiction. So I think the fight and the consensus that needs to be built is around making sure that we are spending appropriate dollars in low-income areas. And that's not just Baltimore City, it's also parts of the Eastern Shore and Western Maryland. But it's that fight. It's making sure that everyone agrees that we need to address equity, because we've been falling even further behind in equity than we have in some of our performance measures. And so I think that fight over equity is going to be critical.
We're going to go Senator Madaleno, and then Brandon, and then Alec.
So I do think that there are 188 members of the legislature who love our children and love our state and want to try to move us forward. I think one of the most difficult areas to see consensus is going to be the fight over local control and accountability, because we're going to be putting more resources in, we're going to be demanding more of our local school systems, and we have a tradition, a long tradition, of letting a lot of those policy decisions rest with local school boards, local administrators. That tension between the state and those organizations, I think, is going to be one where they have the wherewithal and the fortitude to come in and lobby against the recommendations and try to protect the local control. And I think that will be the surprise dynamic that you have to try to overcome. And you need someone who has done that before to get it done this time.
Brandon?
Yeah, I think that, no doubt in my mind, that it's going to be about, our state ranks horribly when you talk about funding schools in areas of concentrated poverty. So I think that's where the fight's going to be. The numbers are what they are. We know that numbers don't lie. But what we cannot afford to have is a governor who's willing to deal on that, who's willing to compromise on that. This is something that has to be implemented so that we do right by those who have least in the wealthiest state, in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. We have to do that.
Alec?
Yeah, there's a big section of the Kerwin Commission. It's about at-risk students. And let's be very clear who we're talking about. We're talking about students in areas of concentrated poverty. And when we're talking about Maryland, we're talking, not entirely, but we're talking in big part about Baltimore. Everybody who keeps saying, oh, Larry Hogan isn't that bad, he seems nice, he's moderate, he's this. I got news for you. We are screwed if Larry Hogan wins re-election, and we will lose on this issue. The entire section for increasing investment for at-risk students, take it out of the Kerwin report, put it into recycling. It is gone if Larry Hogan wins re-election, period.
Ben?
You know, I'm proud to have been endorsed by the teachers with 85% of their vote. And the way I got there is I traveled to every county in the state, listening to teachers and listening to education support professionals and meeting with principals, county by county. The only way that the biggest part is going to be trying to push through the budget changes and the revenue increases. And the only way that we're going to get there is if we have a governor who's first and foremost committed to leading the people of the state, to listening to the people of the state, to forming consensus at the grassroots level. It's going to be hard work. Anybody who thinks that we're just going to get there by leading politicians doesn't understand what it actually takes to get politicians to do tough things. I was proud to have led the effort to abolish the death penalty here. I led it a few years after the sitting governor himself had tried and not succeeded. We got there because we organized. And as governor, you can expect me to be an organizer too.
Thank you. We're going to give you the next question. I want to turn to Shannon Coleman Siciliano, who is co-director of the Strong Schools Maryland, to drill down a little bit deeper about how we tell the differences between these folk.
Thank you. Good evening. So a lot of you are in support of education and you say that you support Kerwin. But what I need to hear is an explicit statement that sets you apart from the other candidates next to you.
Thank you. Mr. Jaffe.
I'm going to shock you. I do not support the Kerwin Commission. You know why? Because you can't put all the blame on the public schools. Where are our mothers and fathers and parents? Many years ago when I was teaching at Ridley Junior High School, I had a parent come to me and say, Mr. Jaffe, I don't understand. One of my students is doing top-notch work. The other, which I had, he's not doing so well. So I said, Mrs. Jones, let me tell you something. It's very easy to be a producer but it's very difficult to be a parent. We need parents to come and do their jobs. We need to bring back the family value system. And it wouldn't hurt to get some religion in all this. We have a maker. That would help too.
Yes.
So I'm a member of the Kerwin Commission. My name will be one of the members and signers on the bottom line for the Kerwin Commission. It's the reason why I'm running, because I want to make sure we get it done, because I think what we are providing there is so innovative. The policies that we need to propel our state forward, because quite frankly, as you well know, it's not going to be enough for us to have the best school system in the country, because we're competing in a global economy. You have to have and be educating young people to be competitive with the best students in the world. And we are falling behind in those measures. And we have to catch up. And we can if we get it done. And that's my history of getting it done when people say it cannot get done.
Thank you. Alec?
Look, I mean, first of all, I think that just about anybody up here would be more effective than Larry Hogan, and so I'm not going to disrespect my fellow candidates. In terms of what I think sets me apart, specifically on this issue, look, I'm a former Baltimore City public school teacher, married to a woman who's in her 3rd decade teaching in Baltimore City public schools, with 3 kids in Baltimore City public schools. I think of it, it's like a bacon and egg breakfast. In a bacon and egg breakfast, the chicken is involved, the pig is committed.
All right. That's the last thing you're going to say.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I'm all in for Baltimore City, for our public schools.
Yes.
I mustn't leave that alone.
Yeah.
What I would say is this. One thing I talked about earlier is that I'm an organizer, and it's just how I approach doing things. But I'm also somebody whose family's been involved in the fight for education equity in Maryland for 66 years. Mom's 78, started when she was 12. And what I know is that education isn't going to make us, education alone isn't enough to succeed in education. That we also have to make sure everybody has health care and they have mental health care. We also have to stop destroying families through mass incarceration. So everything in my agenda is about making it possible for more of our kids to succeed, more of our families to succeed. If we just try to improve performance in education just by focusing on education, we won't get it as far as we want to get, as fast as we need to get there.
Thank you. That's just as good as bacon. Brandon.
Yeah, first we'll tell Alex that swine poisoned his mind. But for me,
tastes good, man.
What we need right now, more than anything, in our state, in our city, in our country, are elected leaders who are unafraid to be unelected because they did the right thing. And if doing this, if fully funding caring, if making sure that children from concentrated poverty, making sure that children that are black and brown are getting the quality, the teachers that they're getting, the quality, the same education that everyone is getting in the state, causes me to be unelected, I'm fine with that. And also, I've lived it. I've lived the life that these young people are living in our city. I've went through our school system from pre-K all the way through high school. I've lived in their neighborhoods. I've seen those bodies. I've had that gun pointed to my head. I've been pulled over by the cops and thrown out of the car. I know their life. I know their struggle.
Thank you. Liz, you're going to have the last point.
Thank you. Well, Sharon Baker, what sets him apart is he's actually done the work of working on education in the General Assembly, as in the Appropriations Committee, as a PTA president, as a community development and education nonprofit worker, and finally, most importantly, as county executive, where he has implemented with county resources as many of the Kerwin recommendations as was possible, from expanding pre-K, full-day pre-K from 8 to 50 schools, increasing teacher salaries, even at great political costs, and raising property taxes just to increase teacher salaries, but also working with the community colleges on P-TECH, creating, I would say, the best arts integration program in the state of Maryland, language immersion, these things that, all the things, and mental health support in the schools, things that the Kerwin Commission is recommending he's already done, and so we are able to hit the ground running.
Thank you.
From having already done it. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to keep going on accountability, and I'm going to go back to a classroom teacher with Mr. Corey Gaber. Corey, you had a question about how teachers should be evaluated.
Okay.
Yeah. Will you step out and see her? Yeah, come on.
So decades of peer-reviewed research says that teachers in the classroom only account for 10% of the variation in standardized test outcomes. So since that is a poor measure to evaluate teachers on, what are the alternative measures that you believe teachers should be evaluated on?
And that question is going to be for you, Senator, but I want to make sure everybody is clear. We're going to move after this question, after the next question, we'll move into questions from social media, so keep those thumbs moving at #RealNewsEDU. Senator?
Thank you, and I appreciate that question, and I think first and foremost is I'm not running to be the state superintendent. You know, I'm running to be governor. Those are sorts of evaluation questions. To me, when we have the conversation about testing, I think we've misused testing and used standardized testing as a way to judge teachers. Doesn't make any sense to me. That should be a role between the one teacher, the principal, and peer assessment within the school system, and then meeting the different goals for a teacher with the progress that is outlined for the students to meet the standards for that grade through the assessments that we determine are important, whether that's standardized to a school system, or on a statewide basis.
Brandon?
Yeah, I think that is critically important. I think that peer review is very important, that we have to have teachers that are, again, making more money, but also spending more time working with each other, working with the students, so that they also can have more time to evaluate each other. We know that that's the way we should do, and I think there's something else that we have to consider, as we talked about earlier. One of my former colleagues would always say, you don't ask the doctor if the medicine is working, you ask the patient. We also, especially when you look at high school, should talk about students and how they review their teachers, that they should be included as well, because ultimately that's who we're trying to serve.
Ben?
I think it's important that we really focus on the progress your students are making from wherever they started. Not just if they're at grade level, but they started 4 levels back. Are they making progress towards it? I think that we really need to also, frankly, get input from peers, yes, but also from parents. Parents, we know the teachers who go the extra mile for our kids, and that should factor in too. And the most important thing is that we have to make sure that every teacher, that we're really investing in their career. Teaching should be at the same level of respect in our society as being a doctor or being a lawyer, and that means that we have to invest in your continuous training and pay you fairly. I've said I believe teachers should be raised at least 29%.
Alec?
Yeah. And I'll just speak about this from my personal perspective. The formal reviews that I got, they were not terribly illuminating. But the reviews and the coaching that I got from Ms. Hill, who 30 years in a classroom next door, and from the network of, they weren't called master teachers, but they were master teachers. They were folks who'd been in the classroom for decades. If we can go to a career ladder for our educators and formalize that informal role that our master teachers have, and then reward them for that, there's nothing, especially for teachers in their first 10 years of their career, that I believe is how we can evaluate teachers in a way that really adds value.
Mr. Jaffe?
Productivity is the answer. I'm very proud of the fact that in 1969, my students took an idea in a Jaffe classroom and actually got that idea converted into law. It was signed into law by President Richard Nixon after they did all the work to get the Senate and the House to pass the bill, and then for President Nixon to sign it. That's what they produced, productivity. And I'm very proud of the fact that that's documented in the 1970 issue of Reader's Digest.
Thank you. Thank you. So this is going to be our last question from the room. I'm going to go to Frank Patinella with the ACLU of Maryland. And I'm actually going to start with Alec. We're going to give you all 30 seconds to respond to his question.
Hi. So everyone basically said that you're in favor of fully funding the Kerwin formula when that comes out. I want to ask a more specific question about an aspect of equity related to the formula. So, the state and the local districts share the education cost, right? And Baltimore City and low wealth districts get more than the high wealth districts. But the APA consultants, the state's new consultants, showed that the wealth calculation needs to be recalculated, right? And if the state adopts that wealth calculation, Baltimore City would get a lot more state money and other low wealth districts as well. and higher wealth districts, such as like Howard County, would get a lot less. Would you support that kind of wealth calculation?
Alec?
Yes.
Ben?
I can give,
okay,
look,
go
I can
ahead.
give you a longer answer, but I believe that, and look, we can make an economic argument to the other jurisdictions in the state for why this is really worth it. If you want to reduce homelessness, if you want to reduce mass incarceration, if you want to reduce public health problems, if you want more people to be able to compete and succeed in the industries of the future, invest in education, in our communities with high concentrations of poverty. You pay now or you pay later. I have a background in economics. We are not going to be able to convince everybody, but it is
Thank you.
ultimately in our economic benefit to do this.
Pay now. Ben?
You know, I asked leaders in Singapore once how they got to be first in the world in education, and they said two things. One, we sent some of our youngest, best, and brightest to Harvard School of Education. When they came home, we did what they said. You all should try that sometime. And then they said that you can only explain it by the fact that the gap between how their kids from low-income families perform versus the wealthy kids in their country is 4 times smaller than it is in our country. So we have to have the courage to have an equity formula that actually deals with poverty as it is in our state.
Is that a yes?
And so that's a yes.
Thank you. Brandon?
Yes.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Yes. The only thing I want to add is it is so unnecessary that we are fighting over limited dollars. We need to expand the pie so that, I mean, Howard County, like all of us, we're spending time there, they are seeing an explosion in their school system, as is Montgomery County. So to ignore, and then Montgomery County is seeing higher rates of poverty in their schools. So to just ignore those problems and not recognize that we need to increase funding so that it's adequate throughout the state while still adopting the new wealth formula, I think, is also critical.
Thank you. Mr. Jaffe?
The answer is no. Throwing money into the educational system hasn't worked. I think the school systems in Baltimore City are worse than ever. You know what you need, folks? Love. Bringing parents to be more responsible. Getting my tutor-mentor program implemented. That's what we need. Not money, throwing wasted money on programs that don't work. Love and a commitment to work together to try to make life better for all of us.
Thank you.
Senator
Madaleno?
So the answer is no, because in fact the consultant is going to withdraw that formula because they realize it is an unworkable approach, and it's based on data that has not been used anywhere in the country. Do we need a formula that provides more resources to the children, to the schools, and to the communities that have greater need? Absolutely. Are there flaws in our approach? Yes. Is that the answer, the APA formula that was put out? No. You need someone who understands how the formulas are put together and the variables to help build the consensus. Because if you move forward with that approach that APA put out, which again will be withdrawn, it will destroy the opportunity to move forward with the Kerwin Commission recommendations because of the way that it completely throws off local contributions around the state.
Thank you. And Senator Madaleno is particularly aware, not only as a member of the commission, but as they call you, the budget guy. And I think what I heard from most of you is that you agree more dollars need to be allocated and you commit to that. And as an educator for almost 20 years, I'm clear that all of the families who may have had limited means that show up in the ways that they can to schools would appreciate those extra resources. And with that said, I want to move on to social media and the questions we have from the interwebs. And first we have a question from Paul. We'll start with you, Ben. And Paul is asking, do you support a millionaire's tax dedicated to fund education? Because all the other suggestions are essentially a sales tax, which means working people pay the most.
Yeah, I may be the only one up here who said quite plainly that I believe that we should tax the 1% more, and we should use it to increase funding for education. Yep.
Thank you. Anyone else?
And by the way, I've had a year or two where I've been in the 1% tax bracket. You know what? Those years, I could totally afford it. It's fine.
Yeah. Anyone else? Would you support a millionaire's tax instead of sales tax types of funding resources?
You're making the assumption that we do not have the resources already to put into the school system in order to fund the formulas. We don't have $2 billion today to start it. But that ramping it up over several years, which is inevitably the approach that's going to be used.
What's our surplus? We have a $500 million surplus
resources.
now.
You have the courage to tax the 1%.
We have the resources. In
How do you
fact,
have the
Ben, I'm the only one that has a record of actually voting for a tax increase up here. And in fact, we have a tax rate for people above $1 million. In fact, above $250,000 and $350,000, which is already amongst the highest in the country. We have an incredibly progressive tax structure, and we should be proud of that in turning in the resources to get it done.
Ben?
I'm simply thinking it should be more progressive than it is. And, you know,
just because you want to tax wealthy
well, hold
people,
on, let's let him finish.
No, absolutely not. Again, Rich, you know, if you had done this earlier, I would have paid it. What I'm saying is that we're at a point where the gap between the haves and the have-not is getting so big. And education is our great equalizer. And we have to be willing to say to those who have the most, you can pay a bit more so that our society can get stronger. If we don't have the courage to take on the 1%, how are we ever going to actually get the billions of dollars that we need, not just through K through 12 education, but to stop the student debt crisis? We've got to be willing to put it all out there on the table. And, you know, the 1% could certainly afford 1% more.
Alec, you wanted to jump in as well?
Yeah, what I would simply say is that one of the things we need to recognize is we have a $43.4 billion plus or minus budget right now. And if we make education sacrosanct, fund education first, and then fight over everything else thereafter, instead of saying we want to do something new in education, oh, we need to go find new dollars for it, no. Let's take the recommendations that are in the Kerwin Commission and let's start with education. And then if we want to, then with our other programs, whether it's, you know, lacrosse camps in Baltimore County or whether it's transportation programs, whatever it is, let's start with education. Let's fund education first.
Thank you, Ralph.
I have proof, right? Do you hear the dialogue between these good folks? This is the problem. What we need are people, ethical politicians, who are really dedicated to working with each other to find solutions, not maintaining their own money, fame, and power. Until we get that, we're going to just what we have right now, this is going to continue.
I think what we need to say to the public is, let's make the argument for the policies, then let's make the argument for the resources, and then let's see where we are. Just raising taxes to raise taxes is not any sort of policy goal in itself. That's deliver the services, that show you, the citizens, the parents, the students, that we are actually going to give you the programs that help you succeed, and then we can go back to the public and say if it's not enough. But to start with the conversation about we need taxes first, that is a loser in this state and in every state.
Okay, I'm going to turn it back to you, Ben.
You know, first of all, you know, Mr. Jaffe, you should know, Rich and I actually agree on a lot. We've worked to get a lot of good things done together. And I think friends should be able to have a debate in our democracy. In fact, I think it's important. And Rich is right. You've got to start with the policy, and then you talk about how we actually cover it. And that's why on my website, I put all my plans there and all of my pay-fors there. And in this case, I said that we should tax the 1% more so that we can make our community colleges tuition-free, so that we can push more of our career education into our high schools. And it's important for us when we're running for office not to play games with you or play hide the ball, but just to put out there, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to pay for it. It's all there at benjealous.com.
So I'm going to move to the next question. Let's see if we can get as many in as possible. Not Without Black Women asked about sexual harassment. Said the sexual harassment Black girls face in schools often takes the form of catcalling, touching, ogling, and name-calling, and echo our history of institutionalized rape and dehumanization in the United States. How will this be addressed in your administration? Brandon, happy, yeah.
Yeah, I'll start very simply. We have to make sure, the governor has to make sure and say that it will not be tolerated in the state anywhere, especially within state government. We have to do that. We have to have a special set of people that are working in Maryland State Police and other agencies to investigate these claims. There has to be training programs and mandatory across the state for all government agencies. We have to make sure that people have ways that they can report these things, and we have to set the tone. You cannot allow the things that have gone on in Annapolis and schools and everywhere else across our state to continue to go on. But that starts with leadership, and that starts with making a place where people feel safe for it to even come forward with the complaints and things that are things that we know have been happening for far too long.
Liz?
Well, two things I'd like to say. I mean, one is making sure that we're training teachers and mental health workers and social workers and everyone in the schools to recognize the signs of bullying generally and just the impact and the way children often respond to being tormented by their peers or maybe even tormented by people who work in the school system. So it's that kind of training, but it's also having a system of anonymous reporting so that students feel comfortable. They may feel ashamed, they may feel uncomfortable going to their teacher, even their parents. And so having systems set up in the school so that students can come forward in a way that they feel safe and in a process they understand and that they feel like they have some control and are empowered within, I think is really critical.
We're going to move to the next question. The question is actually for you, Senator Madaleno. I have a Baltimore City High School teacher, Mark Miazga, wants you to speak to the slowness of the Kerwin Commission study. Monthly meetings, way past initial deadlines, and we're desperate after the budget shortfall last year. What's happening with it? Where's the urgency? How are we moving?
Well, I would think it's moving slow, and it's moving slow for a very important reason. I mean, slower than we anticipated, because the conversation became, what can we expect out of our public schools if we're simply going to give more money to fund the policies we know that's not working? I mean, so it was determined we should look at what are the right policies we should be doing. What are other school systems in our country and around the world doing? What would that cost because they are delivering? Ben referenced Singapore. I mean, that's the perfect model. They are delivering. What are they doing? That's one of the places we've looked at. What would that cost, and how do we design that system from a policy standpoint, from an organization standpoint, and from a funding standpoint? Let's get that right to move forward. And if that's going to take a few extra months to get it done, then that is a good thing, because this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to get it right.
Mr. Jaffe, and do I see Jocelyn? Can you come this way? If you have a follow-up, I want to take your follow-up. Go ahead, Mr. Jaffe.
The problem we have, once again, is we have politicians that we can't trust. That's the Kerwin Commission, as I said before, with all due respect, it's a public PR gimmick by the state legislature. If you really want to get something done, you have to have ethical politicians. And as I've said before, please forgive me, we don't have any right now. That's our problem.
Do you have a follow-up for us? Sure. She's going to come around with the mic. When you have grassroots leaders doing this work, they know people.
Thank you, Mr. Madaleno, for taking my question. My follow-up is basically, I've been teaching for 17 years in Baltimore City Public Schools. Thornton was never funded. I apologize for remaining kind of cynical that this will be. I have a dream that my students will have drinking water in their schools. I'm really hopeful for Kerwin, and our principal keeps telling us we're waiting for Kerwin. It's kind of the light at the end of the tunnel. And so while I appreciate the studying, international studying that's taking place, I'm still wondering, like, a part of me worries that this was done because it's an election year and people don't want to talk about education funding during an election year. And so, and I'm wondering, like, the influence of our governor on that and how that would change if we have a new governor after the election year. How are we going to make sure that we push through things even if they don't make all the voters happy?
Thank you. You want to respond?
Sure. And are you talking about the whole commission or the delay in the report is an election year? Because the whole commission, I mean, when we passed the Thornton Commission, the whole concept was every 10 years we should take a look at the formulas to make sure they're still doing what we hoped they would do. That got delayed because of the recession.
So I want to just have you follow up certainly on the delay, and I think you've answered that question. I want to give Brandon and Alec a chance to come in, but we can go back again. But I think you answered the actual question I heard, which was the delay being an indicator of whether or not it's going to get funded.
Right. I mean, I guess I was just wondering if you thought the delay had anything to do with the fact that our governor wants to be reelected and doesn't want to talk about education funding during this, or is that too cynical?
I think that's too cynical because, in fact, look, I was disappointed in the delay, and at first I thought we're missing a huge opportunity to actually have this be a part of the debate in the last 2018 session. talking to the other commission members, working through this, I came to the conclusion that, in fact, going for a better product that would inform a better conversation was worth that delay.
Thank you.
And that it wasn't a political gimmick or a way to avoid the conversation because of the election year.
Thank you. Brandon?
Coach, thank you, and thank you for everything that you do for our students, including my brother. But I think that the most important thing that you have to do when you elect the next governor, and I know that whoever's up here will do that, well, aside one, I know that they'll do that. We have to do that. Day one, Jim Shea and I will put those bills into place to fund the reforms and the funding for education, for the Kerwin Commission. But the host is right. Educators do not, politicians do not like to talk. You're right, they don't like to talk about education because you don't get to declare victory 3 years later. You don't stand out there with a check at day one and then get to say in re-election, I fixed education in Maryland. That's why you need to elect leaders who are going to do this, because it's not about them, but it's about 10, 15, 20 years down the line. And what we all will have to do is we will all have to make sure that Governor Hogan talks about this, and no matter who wins, I'm going to work my butt off to make sure that they beat him so that our children get what they deserve.
Thank you. Alec?
Yeah, look, I think your frustration is justified, and I agree with you. If you're to grade the Kerwin Commission right now, it's like a menu. It's like going into a restaurant, opening up a menu. Everything looks great, and there are no prices beside it, right? And so what that means then is you get a bunch of people up here talking about how committed we are to fully fund education and implement the recommendations of the Kerwin Commission, but there are no numbers, and there's no time, and there are no proposed timelines. And I wish it had been the case that after 21 months, it's now 21 months after the first public meeting on the Kerwin Commission, that this putting really harder questions to us with numbers, with timelines, if the commission had finished its work, then we would have had a more productive debate. Instead, you get a bunch of kumbaya from people who are running for governor.
Thank you. We're going to take a moment and invite Sharon Blake, who's the running mate for Krish Vignaraja, to the stage. Ms. Blake. Okay.
You're getting a signal from over there.
I have a 1-minute signal, so we're not going to do that. She will join us when we have her. I'm going to move to the next question to keep us going through. We have a question from Shamara Bowens. If additional funds are allocated to Baltimore City Public Schools, how will you ensure that the funds are being spent appropriately at the local level, or what are the other accountability measures that you plan to employ? Sure, Ben?
Most of our schools haven't had improvement in the technology that they use to manage budgets since the Gutenberg press. They do it on paper. They stay central office will say 6 to 18 months behind in trying to track how the money's spent and never be able to actually connect how those changes in spending impacted student performance in a way that gets right down to the school and the classroom. So as governor, I will make sure that we actually manage our school budgets digitally, that school budget managers are able to do it on tablets, on computers, on smartphones. So we have the information in real time, and we can actually connect it to, oh, well, you decided to hire 8 assistant principals. How did that work out? You decided not to hire any assistant principals, but to make sure you had one-to-one iPads and books and more pay for your teachers. How did that work out? We have to track it.
Senator Madaleno?
I think the big challenge for us moving forward with this is going to be pushing forward with the measures that make sure the dollars follow the students into the school. We provide a lot of money to school systems, but that money does not necessarily flow to the schools where it is needed. We give the lump sum to the school system for children who are in poverty, but we don't make sure that that money gets to those schools that have the highest impact of poverty. That's where you need to push, and it will be quite a fight to make sure that you come up with the accountability measures that make sure those dollars actually follow the children into those classrooms.
Thank you. Liz?
So I talked before about partnership and why it matters that we have a cabinet level position that's focused on this issue. And a great example is the crisis over maintenance in the city schools. And so we saw that, obviously come to a head over the last winter. And what became really clear is that the school system in Baltimore has an inability, a structural inability to spend money in an efficient way. And instead of saying, let's fix it, the governor said, you guys are terrible, you don't know how to spend money, you know, yada, yada, yada. That's the opposite of what we need. We need someone, A, to recognize it before it's a crisis, to be so involved that they recognize it's a problem and are fixing it behind the scenes, working collaboratively from day one. But when a crisis comes up, the governor is there saying, let's figure this out. This isn't rocket science.
Yep.
The money exists. We just need to figure out how to spend it over years and budget it appropriately. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Blake, do you want to join us? Thank you. Let's just take a minute to welcome Sharon Blake. Welcome, and for those of you who don't know, Ms. Blake is a career educator over 4 decades as an educator, and she is the running mate for Krish Vignaraja. So welcome, Ms. Blake. All right, so did someone else, Mr. Jaffe, you want to?
Yes, the gentleman who said you're cynical, you are right on target. It ain't going to happen. This current commission is just a waste of taxpayers' money.
All right, so we're going to take our last question from social media. This question is from Brian Roberts. Some of you have already spoken to, in some ways, race equity, but we're going to drill in with this being the final question in a Black Baltimore where over 70% of the population looks like me. How will you change the school system to eliminate structural racism and race-based outcomes in test scores, suspensions, admission to magnet programs, et cetera? Brandon.
First and foremost, I think that this is an issue that we have to do. So actually tomorrow night at 5 o'clock, we'll be discussing my equity assessment program for the city of Baltimore. We'll require every city agency to operate through a lens of equity, looking at every policy to see how they're doing that through race, gender, income, sexual orientation. We will take that to the state level, include that in education as well. We need to do that for our school systems, not just in the city, but around the state. We know that we have teachers that are not culturally sensitive. We know that testing, again, has been racially biased. That's how you do that. You have to do that through policy to make sure that the system is operating through a lens of equity and understanding its customer. Its customer overwhelmingly are minority, Black and brown students in the city of Baltimore, and we have to educate through them.
Alec?
Let me home in on one specific aspect of this, which is gifted and talented education in communities of color. If you actually map where gifted and talented assessments take place and where students are placed into gifted and talented programs, they overwhelmingly index to the whiter and wealthier communities. And GT programs simply are non-present in a lot of our 100% Black schools. And there is genius in these classrooms that is going undiscovered. So one very concrete way to increase equity is recognize that there is genius that's going unrecognized that can be developed.
Thank you. You speak a little bit to the white L. Dr. Lawrence Brown has done research on the white L. Some of you who are watching at home may not be from Baltimore or Maryland for that matter, but there's concentrated wealth and whiteness in a part of the city that kind of takes the shape of an L, and then we have the other parts of the city, which is called the Black Butterfly. And we don't see the types of programs that are in the same way at HBCUs placed in those communities and preserved there, not replicated in communities with affluence. And so I think that's what I hear you speaking to. Ben, did you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. My family's been involved in this movement in Baltimore for a long time. And we have to make sure that our schools are fully funded. We have to make sure that money's spent in an equitable way. We have to make sure that we bring in restorative justice and we keep pushing down the number of arrests that are happening in our schools. We have to keep more guns and more police out of our schools, get more mental health professionals into our schools, and we absolutely have to make sure that our young geniuses are able to access the truly rigorous curriculum that they need.
Liz?
Well, 2 things. One is challenging assumptions about what has to be done a certain way. When I started at City, AP students were only allowed an AP if they had certain scores and taken certain classes. And the students pushed back, so there's a long tradition of activist students, and said, why? Why can't anyone take an AP class? And at first the school said, well, that's crazy, that's not the way it's done. But they saw the light, they converted, and it had no negative impact. And it actually opened it up so that any student in any with any background could take an AP class. So it's just challenging what we think has to be a certain way. Suspensions are a great example of that. Suspensions are bad for kids across the board. The second thing is looking at data, because the aberrations jump out when you look at Baltimore City compared to other schools, other jurisdictions, and when you compare schools within Baltimore City. And that data, those aberrations we should be totally focused on changing them and looking at them constantly and evaluating how to do better.
Thank you. Mr. Jaffe?
What I want to do is, your question is a wonderful question, but it's not easy. What we need is leaders who can motivate, inspire. And I think I know how to do that. My students that work with me, they do it free of their own time. They don't get paid to do this. I want to bring together, if I were elected, all the major religious leaders in our state to a conference. I'm going to instruct them to come up with 6 ideas to make life better for people. And I'm going to tell them, you cannot use government as your answer. I want 6 ideas that can bring us together without getting the phony politicians involved in this.
Thank you. On race, Senator Madaleno?
You have to make sure the facilities are good across the board, across the jurisdictions, within jurisdictions. The city has the oldest facilities in the state. I'm proud of our work to make sure the facilities are getting upgraded. You need to layer on top of that the funding for the programs that help deal with whatever barriers young people have to learning. You need to have good teachers. We talked about this before, teachers of color coming into the school system. You need to reward them and help them with professional development ongoing to make sure that they have the skills to meet the needs of the children in that classroom that are before them that year and institutionalize that permanently.
Thank you. Ms. Blake, the question is around disrupting systemic racism.
So thank you, and I apologize for being late, but I'm coming in from Annapolis and the parking was a challenge as well. So looking at this idea of systemic racism, as Brandon has indicated, I certainly think the policies to create policies through the lenses of diversity is one, but I think equally as important, you have to create that practice. And that practice should occur within the classroom and within schools as well. I think one of the most important things to do, for example, in classrooms is to create collaborative learning opportunities for students and to ensure and intentionally set up, the teacher would intentionally set up a structure where students are of different races, different religious backgrounds, different thinking or ideologies, those students get an opportunity to interact and work with each other. So it's a learning process as well. So yes, we put policies in place, but along with those policies, we put practices in place to model those policies as well.
Thank you. So we are coming to a close. Believe it or not, we could probably be here for another couple of hours. But I am going to invite our candidates to give a 1-minute closing just to share their final thoughts on what they heard, and then we will close out. Thank you for everyone watching. Please stick with us through the end. Mr. Ross.
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming out this evening. Look, no one of us are going to bring equity into our schools. It really does have to be a movement. And for those of you who would choose to really care and engage in our politics, it's a big deal. So thank you for doing that. Look, talent is everywhere in our city and in our state, but opportunity is not. And that needs to change. You know, I know the students that I taught at Booker T. Washington Middle School. I know the classmates of my 3 children who are in Baltimore City Public Schools and the students of my wife. I know they have the same ability as the students who are achieving higher in wealthier communities. If we can restore equity into how we fund education, and if we can elevate the teaching profession, help elevate the teaching profession to what it ought to be, then the payoff to society, to our city, to our state will be remarkable. People might say it's expensive, you pay now or you pay later. There's nothing better we can do.
Thank you. Ben?
Thank you, everybody. This has been a great roving conversation for the last couple hours. My family have been educators since we walked out of slavery. My grandma's granddad, born a slave, co-founded Virginia State University to train teachers, built a one-room schoolhouse with his hands. My grandma's mom taught, my grandma taught. My parents met as teachers here in the city. I teach at the university level now. But we've also always been activists. My dad was one of the few white guys to go to jail repeatedly in Baltimore to desegregate the downtown. And he did it because he was outraged about how his students were being treated. I, as you heard, co-chaired the campaign to pass the DREAM Act, but I was also down at North Avenue when our kids were freezing, talking to Sonia, explaining to her that it was actually good news that our boilers were more than 30 years old because it meant that we didn't have to repair them. We could replace them with lower cost heating systems, and we didn't need money from the state. We could finance it because they're so much cheaper to operate. You could pay them off in just 2 years of your savings on your monthly power bill. And in the process, help drive up student attendance because those boilers, when you get rid of them, you get rid of the smog that they produce, and you stop triggering so many asthma attacks. As a governor, you'll have somebody who's a civil rights leader, who's a movement builder, who also is a business person and understands that there are better ways to get things done sometimes, like not fixing that old boiler, but replacing it.
Thank you. Brandon?
This election is about the future of our state, and most importantly about the future of our children, because the children are the future of our state. We cannot afford another 4 years of Larry Hogan. We know that education is not a priority to him. We definitely know that the education of the students in Baltimore City are not a priority to him. That's why we can't re-elect him. We, the Democrats in Maryland, created this monster when we allowed ourselves to get away from our issues and no longer talking to them. We need a governor who's going to fully invest in public education from day one and not veer from that path. We need a lieutenant governor that understands that Baltimore City's children are his children. Not like Boyd Rutherford that said, if they were my children, I would be down at North Avenue. This is what we need, and that's why we should elect Jim Shea and Brandon Scott to the governor and lieutenant governor so that we can have politicians that will fight for public education above all else.
Thank you. Ms. Embry, we want to get your mic back up.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you. I want to make sure you heard. I appreciate it.
All right.
I have spent my career in public service in Baltimore City, working at the city and the state levels. And I've seen so many good, strong, hardworking people doing smart things in government and nonprofits and across the advocates communities. The problem is doing it at a scale that really changes the direction of Baltimore City. And that has been the struggle of Baltimore for my entire life. What I have seen in Mercer and Baker, and the reason I left my job, which I loved working for Brian Frosch, to spend all day, every day campaigning, was because he's done it. He's done it at scale. He's done it in a way that has changed the trajectory of Prince George's County. And education has been a critical part. He's made the hard choices and devoted the resources. He's made it the primary focus of every budget to make sure that he's doing the things in education that we all know work. So I'm really proud to be running with him. I'm proud to be able to run with someone who has a track record of doing it, of actually getting it done, because I know how easy it is to have good ideas, but it's implementing, it's getting budgets passed. It's all the work of implementation that is so tough, and it's the commitment that I've seen in him that I'm so proud to be part of. So I'm really excited to be here tonight, and I appreciate the excellent questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jaffe?
Thank you for coming. The key issue to me is trust. Which one of us do you trust the most? My students and I started a movement in 2002 to get rid of all the corruption in Maryland politics. The money, the bribes that take place. See, I don't take campaign contributions because they're bribes. That's what they are. And I'm committed to serving one term. And when that one term is over, I will never run again. That way I'm saying to you, I'm not in this for the money or the power or the fame. I want to be a good public servant. I want to serve you and see if we can't solve our problems instead of making them worse, which they are right now. Also, which is also important, my running mate and I are going to serve free. We're going to take the $330,000 that the governor, lieutenant governor get, we're going to put it into a blind trust fund to be given to all the needy in our state. We are the real deal. We hope you will join the Jaffe movement. Thank you.
Senator Madaleno?
Thank you all very much for spending your evening with us and listening to this very informed conversation. When I walked into Burnt Mills Elementary School in Silver Spring, Maryland, for kindergarten, my parents were worried I would never speak. I had that bad of a speech impediment. I went to a school, a public school in a community in Maryland that had the resources and the will to provide the services to me for several years to help me find my voice. I have used that voice in my career to serve the public of the state of Maryland. And now I want to do it as governor because I believe every child, my children, your children, my running mates' children, deserve that same opportunity to be able to live out their dreams and to succeed and build a strong career, a strong family, and a strong life. We can get that done in the state of Maryland if you have the right leadership who can lead the legislature, the public, into making the investments, into passing the policies we need to build a truly remarkable 21st century school system. Thank you.
Ms. Blake, you have 1 minute.
Yes, so once again, Krish and I are both products of public schools here in the state of Maryland. I'm a product of the public schools in Prince George's County. Krish, a product of the public schools in Baltimore County. However, I've spent 43 years of my life as an educator in the Baltimore City public school system. I understand education. I know the difference that education will make in anyone's life. I know that education is the gateway to a middle-class standard of living or better. Krish and I are committed to fully fund the Kerwin Commission. We understand the work that has been done. We understand how difficult it will be to get that work done as well. However, we will ask that community organizations and groups join us, that in order to get the work done, we want to be able to have listening tours. We want to have people engaged and involved. We want to have our parents have a voice in this education process. We know that if you put education in the middle, we will improve not just our schools, but our students, our communities. We will reduce crime. We will improve the economy as well. So we're asking that you vote for Krish Vignarajah and Sharon Blake for governor and lieutenant governor.
Let's give everybody another round of applause. All right, so it's been a long night. You guys did an amazing job. I want to thank you. Thank you to everyone watching and those of you using the hashtag RealNewsEDU. Please continue the conversation. This kind of programming, town halls, our reporting, does not get funded by corporate dollars, does not get funded by advertising. It comes from people like you and I who find it important to have independent journalism and forums that are of the people and by the people. So if you will, if you consider it, please make a donation to therealnews.com/donate. Or go to our website and just subscribe to our reporting. We want to make sure that we are facilitating news that's important to you and about you. If you want to particularly be involved in education reporting or flag stories for us, send a message to education@therealnews.com. We'd love to hear from you. Please look forward to much deeper reporting from us in education and also from our Baltimore Bureau. But we also do national and international reporting, and that's critical for all of our children to live in a global society. So I want to thank you again. Let's give yourselves a round of applause. And again, I'm Dr. Kalila Harris, and you'll hear more from me here at The Real News, and we hope to hear more from you. Have a great evening.